So welcome to meeting number 37 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Safety and National Security. We will start by acknowledging that we are meeting on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. Members are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 Sub 2 and the motions adopted by the committee on Thursday, March 3rd, 2022, the committee is resuming its study on the assessment of Canada's security posture in relation to Russia. With us this morning, we have from the Department of National Defence, we have General Wayne Eyre, Chief of the Defence Staff, Canadian Armed Forces. We have Vice Admiral Ochterlony, and I apologize to all of you when I get your names wrong. Vice Admiral Ochterlony, Commander of the Canadian Joint Operations Command. Major General Michael Wright, Commander, Canadian Forces Intelligence Command and Chief of Defence Intelligence. From the Communications Security Establishment, we have Ms. Caroline Xavier, Chief. We have Mr. Sami Khoury, Head of the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to your remarks, and we will start. I will welcome General Eyre to make the opening statement. 5 minutes, give or take. We won't be too hard on you. Okay.
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you for this opportunity to discuss our geopolitical security environment and specifically the threat Russia poses to Canada. And I'm happy to be here with Vice Admiral Ochterlony, who is the operational commander of our international and domestic operations, as well as Major General Wright, who commands our intelligence enterprise. And I'm also very happy to be here with my colleague from CSC, Caroline Xavier, as well as Sami Khoury, as you introduced. You know, Mr. Chair, we once again find ourselves in a chaotic and dangerous world where those with power, namely Russia and China, are determined to remake the world order to suit their own ends, where the rights and freedoms of smaller, less powerful states are discarded. We're also witnessing violations of the sanctity of territorial sovereignty and of responsible dialogue about the use of nuclear weapons. Now, Russia and China do not differentiate between peace and war.
In seeking to achieve their national objectives, they will use all elements of national power, often acting just below the threshold of large-scale violent conflict. But, as we have seen in Ukraine, they are all too willing to cross that threshold. Russia and China are not just looking at regime survival, but regime expansion.
They consider themselves to be at war with the West. You know, their greatest threat comes not from external adversaries, but from their own populations. So they strive to destroy the social cohesion of liberal democracies and the credibility of our own institutions to ensure our model of government is seen as a failure. Now, we're seeing an example of this information war in real time, where the Ukrainians are winning the battle between truth and lies in the West, but the Russian narrative dominates in many other parts of the world. Now, will we have an international order based on rules or one based on might? This confrontation, this contest of which order will prevail will define certainly the rest of our time in uniform and indeed the rest of our lives.
Many of our allies and partners are clear-eyed about the threat to our future. We must be too. The stakes are high. We must not allow authoritarian powers to change the world order to suit their purposes.
We must work with our partners and allies in a united front, and in doing so, deter miscalculation, adventurism, and great power war. Now, regarding our own national security, The distance and geographic isolation Canada has enjoyed for so long is no longer a viable defensive strategy. Canada and the United States agreed in 2021 to invest in a long-needed modernization of NORAD. But Russia has also made significant investments, including in long-range aviation and the capability of their cruise missiles that its planes carry. Russia also has the capability to threaten Canada via other domains, by sea, but also in the cyber and space domains, where it is capable of threatening our networks, critical infrastructure, communications, and economy. Enfin, il y a la menace.
Finally, there is the nuclear threat, repeated in a not-so-thinly veiled manner numerous times recently. The Russian threat is very clear. We know that Russia has threatened to use nuclear weapons, but we need to be vigilant.
Fortunately, so are the actions we must take to meet that threat. As we prepare for the possibility of open conflict in traditional domains, we must also develop our capacity for confrontation in the cyberspace and cognitive domains. We must integrate our capabilities across all domains. We must develop an integrated approach to national security that combines military responses with diplomatic, economic, and information actions at the local, regional, national, and multinational levels. Et nous devons maintenir un avantage sur le plan.
And we must maintain an intellectual advantage, generating diverse policy options and ideas with an ongoing dialogue among allies, agencies, industries, academia, and governments. This will be critical to sustaining our strategic edge.
Be naive about the threats in the world. Adversaries view compromise as weakness to be exploited. They only respect and respond to strength. Mr. Chair, the rules-based international order, which has underpinned world stability and indeed our national prosperity for generations, is faltering. It needs to be defended. The gravity of these times should be apparent to all. Thank you, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you, General. I will now invite Ms. Xavier to make an opening statement. Please, go ahead.
Hello, bonjour, and thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for the invitation to appear today to discuss Canada's security posture in relation to Russia. My name is Caroline Xavier, and my pronouns are she, her, and elle, and I am the new chief of the Communications Security Establishment known as CSC. I am joined today by Sammy Curry, head of CSC's Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, which you have heard referred to as the Cyber Centre. I'm pleased to join you, and I too would just like to take a moment to acknowledge the land from which I'm joining you today, which is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin-Anishinaabe Nation. Je vais vous présenter un bref.
I'm going to provide the committee with a brief update on CSC's role in Canada's cybersecurity posture as it relates to Russia and present some of the recent work that CSC has done to protect Canadians.
The Minister of National Defence is one of Canada's key security and intelligence agencies. The Communications Security Establishment Act, or CSC Act, sets out 5 aspects of our mandate: cybersecurity and information assurance, foreign intelligence, defensive cyber operations, active cyber operations, and technical and operation assistance. As part of this mandate, CSC is the country's lead technical authority for cybersecurity. Le Centre canadien pour la cybersécurité.
The Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, more commonly referred to as the Cyber Centre, is a branch within CSC and a single point of expertise on technical and operational matters.
Key findings regarding the current cyber threat landscape, particularly as it relates to Russia. I should note that CSC has issued 4 bulletins about Russian-backed activities this year, focused on threats to cybersecurity and on disinformation. Tout d'abord, voici quelques cybermenaces.
To set the stage, I'd like to highlight some of the current cyber threat challenges Canada faces. We identified these in our National Cyber Threat Assessment, which I would encourage you to read if you'd like to have a better understanding of the current threat landscape.
That cybercrime is the most prevalent and most pervasive threat to Canadians and Canadian businesses. Cyber criminals trying to probe Canadian systems have been found in Russia, China, and Iran, among others. These actors use various techniques such as ransomware, theft of personal data, and online fraud. Critical infrastructure operators and large enterprises are some of the most lucrative targets. While cybercrime is the most likely threat to impact the average Canadian, the state-sponsored cyber programs of China, North Korea, Iran, and Russia pose the greatest strategic threat to Canada. Foreign cyber threat activities, including Russian-backed actors, are attempting to target Canadian critical infrastructure operators, as well as their operational and information technology. La Russie possède d'importantes.
Russia has impressive cyber operational capacity. We know that they have used, for example, solar wind technology to disinformation against COVID-19.
Challenges to Canadian cybersecurity. As I have noted, Russian disinformation campaigns also threaten Canada and Canadians. In July this year, CSC noted that it had continued to observe numerous Russian-backed disinformation campaigns online aimed at supporting Russia's brutal and unjustifiable invasion of Ukraine. Maintenant que je vous ai présenté les principes.
Now that I've gone over some of the key trends and threats, I'd like to provide an overview of how CSC's mandate helps us address these challenges. CSC has unique technical and operational capabilities which allow us to respond to the various types of threats that Canada faces, such as the threat of hostile state actors.
Intelligence program provides sophisticated capabilities, which allows us to access, process, decrypt, and report on current and emerging cyber threats. We use this information then to brief and disseminate to government. Le renseignement étranger que le CSC recueille.
The foreign intelligence CSC collects allows us to pass that information to not only critical infrastructure owners and operators in Canada, but also to our allied and NATO partners.
Any materialized threat allows them to proactively protect and defend their systems. The CSE Act further enables us to provide technical and operational assistance to federal law enforcement, security and defense partners, including the Department of National Defense, our Canadian Armed Forces, the RCMP, and the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, CSIS. This means that CSE is authorized to assist the CAF in support of government-authorized military missions such as Operation Unifier, and this includes intelligence sharing and cybersecurity. L'un des principaux rôles du CST est
One of CSC's main roles is to inform the government of the activities of foreign entities which threaten Canada or its allies. These may include foreign-based cyber threats, espionage, terrorism, and even disinformation campaigns.
When the invasion of Ukraine began, we have observed numerous Russian-backed disinformation campaigns online designed to discredit and spread disinformation about NATO allies, as well as false narratives about Canada's involvement in the Russian-Ukraine conflict. Par exemple, les médias contrôlés ont reçu.
For example, controlled media outlets were directed to include doctored images of Canadian Forces members on the front line and false claims about Canadian forces.
Part of the Government of Canada's efforts to help inform Canadians on how to help stop the spread and protect themselves from disinformation. We will continue to work closely with our Five Eyes partners, as well as harness all of our expertise to confidently ensure Canada's resiliency against threats in terms of cybersecurity or disinformation. Malgré le niveau de sophistication.
Although Russian cyber threat and disinformation actors are becoming increasingly more sophisticated, I can assure you that we are working tirelessly to raise Canada's cybersecurity bar and protect all Canadians from these emerging threats.
Necessary expertise in place to monitor, detect, and investigate potential threats. And we are developing further capabilities and capacities to take active measures to protect, deter, and defend against them. Nous continuons également de publier des avis.
We also continue to publish advice and guidance for Canadians and Canadian businesses to improve their cybersecurity practices.
Continue to collaborate closely with our Five Eyes and our NATO allies to protect the critical infrastructure, economies, and democratic systems of our country. And with that, I will be pleased to have the opportunity to answer any questions you might have. Merci.
Thank you, Ms. Xavier. We'll start our round of questions now with Ms. Dancho. Ms. Dancho, please go ahead. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much to the witnesses for being here. It is an honor to have you, and General Eyre, it is an honor to meet you in person. Thank you for everything you and your colleagues are doing to keep Canadians safe. I have a number of questions for you, General Eyre. I've been reviewing some of the media that you've been doing in recent months and quite concerned by some of the things that you've been sharing with Canadians of the state of our military and our military preparedness. In May 2020, you mentioned, given the deteriorating world situation, we need the defense industry to go on to a wartime footing and increase their production line. You went on to say, we're facing a security situation in the world that is as dangerous or more dangerous than the end of the Cold War. You'd also said Canada is not nearly as secure as it once was. Our understanding throughout the study that we've been having is that with the conclusion of the Cold War, our infrastructure, defense capabilities that went along with our NORAD infrastructure has been neglected, as has perhaps our Canadian military. Can you comment on that, given in the context of what you're saying, that we may be in a more dangerous situation than, in fact, during the Cold War?
So, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I think that the comments that you attribute to me are reflected in my opening statement as well about the urgency of the security situation that we are currently facing. I am concerned that as the threats to the world security situation increase, as the threats at home increase, our readiness is going down within the Canadian Armed Forces. That is the reason why we have embarked on what we're calling reconstitution. Reconstitution is a military term that is used, it's a military operation after a large-scale operation to rebuild, rearm, re-equip. While the pandemic has not been kind to the Canadian Armed Forces, our numbers have shrunk, and so we're embarking on a priority effort to get our numbers back up, recruiting, retention, so that we can provide that readiness. But readiness is more than just people. Readiness is also based on training, it's based on equipment, and it's based on sustainment. And we're working in those other three areas as well to make sure that we can provide the training that is absolutely, or the readiness that is essential so that we can respond at scale and at speed to the needs of Canadians. But we have lots of work to do in front of us.
Thank you, General. You were also quoted in the Toronto Star just today regarding more to what you're saying, but that the rebuilding process needs to occur on an accelerated timeline, and that these shortcomings that you've discussed today are preventing the Canadian Armed Forces, more specifically, quote, from being in the position it needs to be in order to excel as a modern and combat-ready force. And further, you went on to say that ultimately these personnel shortages are, and I'm going to quote you, jeopardizing the readiness and the long-term health of Canada's defense capabilities. So can you outline for the committee, just add on to that, how serious is this, and how serious does the federal government need to be taking these investments that clearly are critical to our national security?
So, Mr. Chair, this is a challenge that not only every Western military is facing, but we're facing it here at home as well, with labor challenges, with the real challenges in the workforce, and that's reflected in our own numbers as well. I am very, very worried about our numbers, and that's why we're putting it as a priority effort, the reconstitution of our military. And so what we're doing about it specifically, well, we are looking at our recruiting system. We've staffed our recruiting system to 100%. We are streamlining the recruiting system. We've brought in a retention strategy, but there are many more things that we continue to work on to ensure that the quality of service that our members experience is what it needs to be. You know, let's face it, nobody joins the military to get rich. And what we offer is something transcendent, the ability to serve your country. But we have to make sure that the quality of service is extended to such aspects as financial security for our members and their families, quality equipment that they can work on, modern equipment, quality infrastructure that they can have, and meaningful employment. And that means meaningful overseas deployments as well as meaningful employment here in Canada.
Thank you, General. Can you comment on the importance of reaching our 2% spending commitments for NATO? Is that a relevant number? Should we be trying to reach that as quickly or at an accelerated rate, as you've said?
So, Mr. Chair, it's not my position to talk about the specifics of our defense spending and any arbitrary target, but I will tell you that the military that we have today is not the military that we need for the threats that are appearing in the future. And so we need to continue to look and assess those threats and make sure we've got the capabilities to address those emerging threats.
General, just with my last minute, would you say that Canada is prepared for any eventuality in terms of defending itself?
Mr. Chair, any eventuality is a pretty broad characterization of the security environment, and we have to deal in probabilities because the imagination could run wild. And so we need to... Sorry.
I was just going to say, when the war in Ukraine, the Russian invasion first broke out, I had brought the question to our Minister of Defense, Minister Anand, to ask, is Canada prepared for the threats that Russia is making, not only to Ukraine, but to the world and those who help defend Ukraine? And she responded that Canada is prepared for any eventuality. But given your comments and what we've learned during the study, I'm very concerned that that is not the case. Just with my concluding few seconds, can you comment on what needs to be done today in the coming months to ensure we are prepared for the most likely or any eventuality?
So, Mr. Chair, as I stated, we need to rebuild our readiness so that we can respond with sufficient number of forces at the speed required. And so that is what we are focused on right now, those 4 elements of readiness that I talked about.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Dancho. We go now to Mr. Chang. 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. And I would like to thank all the witnesses for taking your time to be here with us today. My question is for General Eyre. The director of the CIA, William Burns, has recently stated that while the CIA has not seen any practical evidence that Putin is moving closer to the use of tactical nuclear weapons, what we have to do is take it very seriously and watch for signs of actual preparation. What would these preparations look like in Russia, and what should the response be from Canada if this does happen?
So, Mr. Chair, this is something that we watch closely as well, and we've got to be concerned about the possibility of escalation. But that being said, we cannot allow nuclear coercion from stopping us from doing the right thing, because others are watching and it will become a model for the future. But in terms of the details, I'll turn over to General Wright to provide additional context.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I would absolutely agree with the director of the CIA that Russia has the capability. What the Five Eyes Alliance and our NATO allies are laser focused on is whether the intent exists. In terms of the question regarding indicators, this is obviously something that the Five Eyes Alliance is laser focused on. We do closely track indicators and warnings. However, because of the sensitivity of those, I don't think we can discuss in this forum.
Thank you so much. What do we know about politicians within Russia calling for the removal of Putin from office and the accusation that some have made of high treason against him? And is Canada tracking these internal developments in any way?
I think we'll first turn to General Wright again to address that one.
Mr. Chair, we closely track all aspects of the conflict with Russia. We have, since the days before the invasion, where Vladimir Putin was blatantly lying that it was only a military exercise, we have been trying to ascertain both his intentions but also the strength of the Russian state and the support for him. What I would say is that Vladimir Putin has spent over 20 years consolidating power in the state around him and a very small group of advisors.
If I may, Mr. Chair, the only thing I would add, as CSC being the National Foreign Intelligence Signals Intelligence Program, we provide intelligence so that senior decision makers are able to get some of that insight into the activities, the motivations, as well as the capabilities and the intentions of some of those foreign adversaries, including some of the ones that you mentioned. So that's about the extent of what we can discuss this morning.
Thank you so much. So as this war progresses in Russia and in Ukraine, and Russia seemingly becomes more desperate to annex certain region of Ukraine and claim victories in the region, do you believe the cyber threats to Canada from Russia increases, decreases, or remain the same? And why would that be? Yes. Sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, can I just get the question repeated again?
Of course. As this war progresses and Russia seemingly becomes more desperate to annex certain regions of Ukraine and claim victories in the region, do you believe the cyber threats to Canada from Russia increases, decreases, or remains the same?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So what we have seen is that there has been ongoing threats from Russia with regards to their cyber capabilities, and they've demonstrated a willingness to use them. Since early January, mid-January, we've put out several bulletins, and we've been putting out information about the Russian threats and vulnerabilities that they like to typically exploit, along with the advice and guidance on how to mitigate them. So we are seeing, and we have put out in our national cyber threat assessment, what our views are with regards to hostile state actors, and Russia being one of them. And so as a result, we are, concerned about what their whether or not the opportunities could present themselves. But what we also assess, however, is that they would not be perhaps directing some of those cyber threats directly to us in terms of our critical infrastructure, given that we are not directly implicated in the conflict. However, these are things that we continue to monitor and investigate and identify whether or not we need to provide advice for the actions that need to be taken.
Thank you so much. Again, this question is for Ms. Xavier. When you speak about hostile state actors, would you think Russia is involved in any way in the conflict that's going on between Azerbaijan and Armenia now?
Thank you for the question. I can't comment in terms of things that are not that are not of the level that I can discuss in this unclassified environment. However, as I mentioned, we continue to closely work with our allies and monitor what is going on in the global world with regards to hostile state actors. And as we've stated in our national cyber threat assessment, we do see that Russia is one of those actors that has the sophisticated ability to be able to, use their cyber programs. And so as a result, we are quite concerned, and it's an area that we work with allies and identifying what the threats may be and put out necessary advice and provide intelligence to the decision makers to be able to take the necessary actions.
Thank you, Mr. Chang.
Thank you so much.
Madame Michaud, c'est de...
Madam Michaud, you have the floor. You have 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for their presence here. Very appreciated. I have a question first for Ms. Xavier. I read an article from the Montreal Journal and in the spring, and talking about the threat posed by Russian and indicating that ransomware attacks had increased by 500%. Perhaps for the benefit of members, could you explain to us why this data isn't really well known? Because you say it is the tip of the iceberg, but why is it that this isn't openly discussed? Why do companies and individuals not have encouragement to indicate that they have been attacked so that other organizations that might be susceptible could take action? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. We would certainly like Canada to be immune to cybersecurity threats. Our aim as an organization is to ensure that all Canadian organizations and individuals are aware of the need to be very cautious and protect their data. As you have said, there has been an increase in ransomware attacks. And for that reason, we are working very closely with the industry, with governments, and with individual Canadians and companies to raise awareness. But we are working with organizations that have been victims of these types of attacks, and as you have said, many do not declare them. We are continuing to talk openly about these threats. We are doing a lot of education and information offering. Information is available to how to prevent and protect against these attacks. This is certainly a worrisome aspect. Canada isn't alone in facing these issues and having many people not declaring these attacks. We are working with allies across the world and raising the importance of the issue. We know that we also have to help people find solutions. Thank you. General Eyre, thank you for your opening remarks. I think that you were very honest. It is very good to have people that will be open about the situation, even though it can be frightening. Sometimes we can see that some countries are working only in their own interests, and you have said that there are threats to Canada from Russia. There is also a comparison between the effect of nuclear weapons and cyber crime. Of course, it is difficult to compare the two, but could you try to?
Monsieur le Président, merci beaucoup pour
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
C'est difficile de...
It's difficult to really compare between these two types of threats, that is, cyber attacks and nuclear weapons. Both of them are a threat to our country, and we have to be prepared against them. I will ask my colleague responsible for intelligence, Major General Wright, to answer. The General is quite right. Cyber threats are very important, and Russian considers North America as one unit and does not make a distinction between the U.S. and Canada. Our real expert here is the CSE chief when it comes to cyber threats. Thank you. I understand that Canada and the U.S. are considered as a single target by Russia. We know that there have been economic sanctions imposed by both Canada and the U.S. Are we in a good position if we do have increased attacks?
Pour la question. C'est toujours difficile de préparer pour une attaque nucléaire, mais nous devons continuer à travailler avec nos collègues, avec NORAD, pour avoir l'avertissement d'une attaque. Mais c'est difficile de préparer pour les conséquences d'une attaque comme ça. Selon moi, nous devons continuer de développer notre résilience nationale pour tous les types de désastres.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I'm not.
Is the interpretation working now? Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Start at the beginning. I'll make allowances of time. I'm not sure any part of that was, I was listening in French and I didn't realize it, but not that my French is that good, but maybe if you could start your answer from the beginning and we'll make those allowances.
Say?
I'll restart my answer. As I said, it's difficult to prepare against a nuclear attack because the consequences are huge. But in my opinion, we have to continue to develop our national resiliency to deal with disasters of various types. We have to continue to work closely with our American colleagues through NORAD because it is critical for us to have early warning of any attack against the continent.
Super, je vais la
Thank you. I've got 1 minute and I will take it. I have a question to end off my first turn. We are talking about Russia as a threat right now, but over 80% of the Russian forces are involved in the Ukrainian invasion right now. So does that make us a little less worried about its capability to attack another country or North America? Mr. Chairman, that's an excellent observation. But I have to say that Russia has deployed most of its land forces for the invasion of Ukraine, but its strategic forces, its nuclear forces are certainly available. Thank you, ma'am.
McGregor, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And before I begin, I just want to thank all of our witnesses for being here. I know how valuable your time is, and our committee sincerely appreciates you being here today. General Eyre, I'd like to start with you. One thing we have been witnessing with Ukraine is what is possible when you have a determined fighting force combined with Western training and Western equipment. And I think we've all been quite astonished at the capabilities of the Ukrainian military. At the same time, I think we've also had the opportunity to learn more about Russian military capabilities, their fighting doctrine, the morale of their troops, etc. And we know from public news sources that they have suffered some serious setbacks in the last month. I guess my question to you is, I know Canada and all of its NATO allies are paying close attention to this conflict. In general terms, what can you say what have we learned about Russian military capability from this conflict? And how is NATO doctrine evolving from that assessment?
Well, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. I'll say a few comments, then give Admiral Ochterlony, who monitors this on a daily basis, the chance to make a few comments. I will say that the will to win that we see within Ukrainian forces is probably the key determinant of their success. We were very happy to see Ukrainian forces embracing what we call mission command, empowerment at the lowest levels to be able to go off and improvise, take advantage of the local situation, and create success. We're not seeing that on the Russian side. They have very much the old Soviet mentality of top-down, centrally driven command style. So that is one of the big observations. We've seen failures on the Russian side. Failures at the strategic level to connect ends, ways, and means, and their political ends did not match their military ways and means, and so we've seen a disconnect there where they've constantly had to readjust what those ends are going to be. And even now, their maximalist ends are doubtful if they're achievable. But we've seen challenges as well throughout their force, whether it is on the training side, the ability to integrate combined arms. That's artillery, engineers, Air Force, all working together. It's not there. Their logistics challenges are pretty significant. What we have learned as a force, well, what we've reinforced is just the strength of empowering a highly motivated force and giving them the authorities and the resources to act on the ground. I am very, very proud of the training that our forces have done since 2015 and be able to impart that leadership style at that lowest level. And that training continues today with Operation Unifier. And with that, I'll turn to Admiral Ochterlony.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chief. And as the Chief's noted, we've been conducting Operation Unifier since 2015, training our Ukrainian Armed Forces partners with our other allies, U.S., U.K., Lithuania, other countries, to ensure that they had that capability, the training to maximize their capability in the field, which you're seeing. And I really, echo your comments. You've been exceptionally impressive, the Ukrainian Armed Forces, and they're determined, their will to fight for their country, and that's been quite impressive. You talked about lessons learned, which is quite key. Obviously, we're learning from this conflict. We learned from the Ukrainians in 2015. We took a lot of the lessons in the Donbass from 2015 and modified our tactics and procedures within NATO, within Canada, and our allies, and we're learning today against the Russian forces. What I would caution is that we're learning as well as the Russians are learning and the Chinese are learning. This is something for the committee. The fact is that we're not the only ones learning from this event. What you've seen is cohesion of the West has happened, and that has been phenomenal. The cohesion of NATO has been great, and I think our adversaries around the globe are seeing that, and they will react to this. So as it's going on, we're going to learn, and we're a learning institution. The other organizations are also going to learn from this as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to get into another question for CSE. I only have a couple of minutes left. You're aware, I think, of the government's legislation bill C-26, which is going to designate vital systems and vital service providers, make some pretty significant amendments to the Telecommunications Act. A lot of what you talked about the disinformation campaigns, we're very familiar with as a committee. It formed a lot of our study into ideologically motivated violent extremism. Aside from what's included in C-26, I'm interested in CSE's working relationship with social media companies. And can you provide an assessment of how that is, and what more do policymakers and the legislative sphere need to pay attention to in maybe making your job a bit easier in that relationship?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question, and I really do appreciate the question. We actually have a great cyber partnership program with industry, with academia, with the social media organizations, and I'm actually going to hand this question over to my head of the Cyber Center because he works with them practically every day.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. As the Chief pointed out, we do have a working relationship a very good working relationship with lots of tech companies out there, including social media company. As the head of the Cyber Center, the nature of our relationship with those companies is to make sure that we understand how they mitigate cyber threat and how do we facilitate the cooperation in the event of we need their help in tracking down cyber actor or cyber threats. So that is the nature of our engagement with the cyber tech. We've also put out some publications, especially this year, about how to help Canadians spot misinformation or be at least more aware of where to get their credible news and how to spot sometimes misinformation or disinformation campaign. So that's the thread that the Cyber Center takes on misinformation, disinformation, and engagement with tech companies.
Thank you.
9 seconds. Thank you, Mr. McGregor. So that wraps round one. We will start round two. Now, we won't be able to do a full round two. Each party is only going to have time for one question slot. We'll start with Mr. Lloyd. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses for being here. Sir, given what you've said about the recruitment and retention challenges in the Canadian Forces and how serious they are for our readiness, I'm wondering if you can tell us what are the barriers or challenges, are they philosophical, legislative, or operational, to including permanent residents in the Canadian Armed Forces?
Mr. Chair, thank you for that question. Excellent question, and you're going to see. So right now, there are no barriers for permanent residents, and we are about to make that much more public to attract that segment of our society into our ranks.
Thank you, and I was not aware of that, and thank you for saying that, because I know, talking to recruiters, that very often we have new Canadians or permanent residents who want to serve because they love our country, and it's good that we're finding ways to include them in that. Sir, some of the challenges we're seeing in Atlantic Canada that we saw in Abbotsford last year, the Canadian Forces' ability to respond to disasters is limited, but they've taken an increasingly frontline role. I'm wondering if you can comment on your views about the benefits, perhaps, or the challenges of a civil protection force of civilians to be a force multiplier to support the military in these sorts of situations.
So, Mr. Chair, another issue that is near and dear to us as we take a look at our ability to respond. Let me first say that our top priority is protecting Canadians here at home. So when the call comes, we shelve everything else to make sure that we have the capacity to respond at speed. But that being said, with the increasing frequency and intensity of these natural disasters, we're being called upon more and more to respond, not necessarily as a force of last resort, but in some cases a force of first choice. So what is needed? Well, it's additional capacity, and it could be at the municipal or provincial level. But that being said, and I've publicly stated this before, given the extent of the disasters we're facing, we still have to be that force of last resort. The Canadian Forces still has to be there as the ultimate insurance policy for this country if there is not sufficient capacity. What we provide and what any other organization should provide is that formed, organized labor pool that's got its own inherent sustainment, so it can supply itself, it can move itself, and provide its own command and control and look after itself. That's the real value of what we provide, and we would any similar organization, any supplementary organization should provide the same capacity or the same type of attributes.
Yeah, and this question relates to this study because, as we know, foreign state actors are trying to target our critical infrastructure, and I'm wondering if you can maybe speak on why, in your opinion, is it just because of the intensity and the frequency of these disasters that the Canadian Forces is being called upon more regularly, or is it because we've seen a degradation in our other capabilities and that is leading to the Canadian Forces, our non-military capabilities? Are those being degraded, and is that why the Canadian Forces is being called upon? Why is this happening?
So, Mr. Chair, again, a great question, and one could argue, what other capabilities did they actually exist, or should they exist? The other piece that you talk about is attacks on our critical infrastructure, and as we take a look at deterrence, how do we deter those attacks? One of the concepts, or one of the sub-elements of deterrence, is deterrence by denial. And what that means is adversaries' attacks are not successful, so they won't try it in the first place. If we can identify those single points of failure, if we can prove to be resilient as a society, as a nation, to thwart the intent of those attacks, they may not have happened in the first place. Hey, our adversaries are looking for soft targets, and we've learned this on operations around the world. If we present a soft target, we invite ourselves for attack.
Thank you. And I guess in 30 seconds, I'll just observe that I think General Omar Bradley said that amateur study strategy and professional study logistics. I think we're seeing that the Russian logistics are absolutely collapsing on the Ukrainian front. What can Canada do to ensure that our logistics are strong going forward?
So, Mr. Chair, another item of item of concern. One of the observations over the course of the pandemic was that our own internal supply chains, internal sustainment system needs work. And so currently, as one of our lines of effort, one of the initiatives we're working on is increasing our own ability to sustain ourselves, to ensure that our logistics are strong. But it's a work in progress. It requires people, it requires technology, it requires equipment. But given the nature of our country, the geopolitical or the geography of our country, where we are in the world, ensuring that we can project our capabilities to where they are needed internationally, but also domestically, requires a high degree of logistics, which we must continue to invest in.
Thank you, Mr. Lloyd. We go now to Mr. Nur Mohammed for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to echo my colleagues' comments by thanking you all for the work that you do in keeping Canada safe. It's it's a complicated world, and we're grateful for all that you do. General, you spoke in your opening comments about the importance of demonstrating strength. Now, we know that we are never going to be the largest fighting force in the world. We're not going to spend the most, money on the military. What do you think that strength that you talk about needs to look like?
Mr. Chair, I firmly believe that the competitive advantage we have as a country is being a group of like-minded friends, allies, and partners who are, well, I said like-minded or like-minded enough, share enough in common in terms of values so that can stand together against aggression, against adventurism, against expansionist policies. And so working together with those partners, allies, friends is incredibly important, and doing our part to share in that collective strength, that collective deterrence.
Thank you. And the second part of your closing struck me. You said our way of life needs to be defended. What does that defense look like, in your view?
Mr. Chair, in my view, that means engaging in the world responsibly, supporting our friends and allies when they need support, doing our part to support them and being ready to support them, being transparent about our intentions. Let's face it, the rules-based international order that has been in place since the end of the Second World War has underpinned our national prosperity, has underpinned our economic growth. And, I, for one, believe that it's worth defending.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Madame Xavier, pour vous, vous avez...
Ms. Xavier, you talked about cybercrime and the threats that Russia poses to our type of life. So could you talk about the work specifically about the impact that you have seen on Canada through your work? Thank you for that question. Just to confirm, the question is if I can talk about what I've seen through my work. Well, I recognize that there are aspects that are classified and that you cannot discuss, but in your work, to the extent that you can discuss it with us, what are the threats and the impact, in your opinion? Thank you for that question. What I can tell you is that because we have the CSC Act that gives us the authorization to use the tools that we have to protect and ensure that our systems are able to defend against the types of threats that we are talking about. What we work to do is to ensure that our systems can defend against those threats. But we work very closely, as the chief said, with our international important partners, especially those in the Five Eyes community. And we try to keep abreast of what these threats are to the greatest extent possible so that we know what information Canadians and Canadian companies need. We want to protect not just government systems, but also all the systems that are essential for Canadians.
It's almost like a passing comment that you had to resort to Twitter to explain something to Canadians. How has CSE had to change the way that you think about dealing with misinformation in your own operations, and in particular, how you talk to Canadians, because for a very long time, nobody knew what the CSE was, and everyone's very happy about that. And as a young public servant, somebody tried to recruit me to the CSE, and I had no idea what it was, right? But now, you've taken a more public posture. You've had to in the world that we operate in. How has it changed the way that you do your business in terms of letting Canadians know about the things that they need to know about? And what has that meant for your organization?
Thank you very much for the question. And I really do appreciate it. And you're right, we have had to look at things differently. We've had to change the way in which we work, but we're really proud about the fact that we've had to do this, this categorical shift. And this aspect of having to use Twitter and declassify intelligence to be able to share it with with Canadians, but also with allies that are fighting with partners that are in Ukraine. And this is unprecedented. These are not things we've had to do before, but we are continuing to explore what are the manner in which we can continue to ensure that Canadians are aware of the threats in whatever manner we can that doesn't impact our tradecraft or impact the way in which we do our business. But this is the new world for us, and so we're going to continue to explore how that can happen. But being able to, declassify information and make sure that the real information is out there, and trying to encourage media and others to amplify the correct information is one of the ways in which we've seen some good success in that space.
Thank you very much. Mr. I don't know how much time I have left.
That's done. Thank you, Mr. Nur Mohammed. Madame Michaud.
Ms. Michaud, you have the floor, and you have 2.5 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have another question for you, General Eyre. You said earlier, I want to come back to this, that Canada had something to fear for sure, but that North America was a single target. But given that we have a very long northern border that we share with Russia, that's particularly worrisome. Perhaps you could tell us about what we are doing in the Arctic, what our discussions with the U.S., NATO, and others are on how we can best pay attention to that area. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. We have to make sure that we continue to focus on the Arctic to protect our sovereignty, not just for today, tomorrow, the next few weeks, but for the next decades to come. Because the threats against our sovereignty are not extremely serious right now, but in the foreseeable future, the threat may well increase. So we have to invest in the needed capabilities in all areas: land, sea, air, cyberspace, and space for our operations. Now, I will ask our operational commander to say a few words. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. This is a big threat.
As we face, one of them would be training, and one is the chief has noted. There's infrastructure challenges in the north, there's capability challenges, domain awareness is a challenge because of the vastness of this. But in terms of specific training, we actually conduct training annually in the region. You're seeing an ever-increasing training across domains in the north, involving the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, including our partners within our allies and partners around the globe. So you have seen that increase in training, and that is an annual series of exercises we conduct to make sure we're able to operate in the north, because it is a very hostile environment, and be able to, so as I said, consolidating that infrastructure, that sustainment, that training, and the exercising allows us to have those capabilities in the north to support Canadians. Merci.
Merci. Je sais pas si...
Thank you. I don't know if I have enough time for one more question, Mr. Chairman. A very short one. So this is a threat not necessarily against Canada, but rather against the world order in general, outside China and Russia. There are countries that have abstained from a motion at the UN to condemn the invasion of Ukraine. Do you think that some of those countries might align themselves with Russia and China to create more disturbances in the world? Mr. Chairman, once again, thanks for that question. There are states that indeed are either threatened, that are allies already, but that are aligning themselves with those major states, and they don't want to be aligned with the West, They want to protect their strategic space and don't want to align themselves with authoritarian states either.
2 minutes and a half, and take us home.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'll just have one question, and I'll have it for the CSE. In your opening remarks, when you were talking about the cybercrime, and I want to focus specifically on the cybercrime that's originating from Russia, we know, like a lot of Canadian companies are very worried about attacks or threats coming their way going public. It can damage their reputation. It can cause a loss of investor confidence, and it can really harm their brand. And I know this is a real challenge for your organization. But for the organizations or individuals who are launching these kind of attacks, I guess I was wondering if you could maybe inform our committee on what kind of a profile you're witnessing. Are these loosely affiliated criminal organizations in Russia? What kind of a relationship do they have with the Russian state? Are you witnessing some kind of a coordinated strategy? I know a lot of that is probably fairly classified, but if you can go into fairly broad terms for this committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. And as was mentioned, we can't speak to the specifics, but what we can say is that when we become aware of what a cyber criminal traits looks like or what the profile is, and it's something that we are able to declassify, we definitely want to share that with industry. And that was witnessed in the bulletin that we put out in January in particular, where we went out and really told private industry what Russia might be capable of in the critical infrastructure space, just warning in general of what one should be concerned about, because we know that they can operate in a sophisticated manner. And so what we try to promote amongst industry in particular related to hostile states en general, not just those that are Russian, but in particular, when we understand the profile, such as we've been watching in terms of Russia, is giving them the necessary advice to be able to do whatever they can to patch their systems, to prevent the systems from being vulnerable, and really monitor the systems, because that's the other piece that's really important, so that you're always keeping an eye on whether things are going as they're supposed to be going. And so we offer information sessions on a regular basis, as well as bulletins, advice. As soon as we are able to provide information that can be transparent to the public, we do so. And that goes to the question that was asked previously, where we really work hard at trying to find ways in which we can declassify the information and make it more public, so that people are made aware of what the Russians are possibly capable of doing. But unfortunately, that's about the extent of what I can say.
Sure. And I'll just end by, again, thanking each of you for appearing today. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. McGregor. That does, in fact, wrap up our questions. On behalf of the committee, I would like to thank all of the witnesses, the whole panel, for sharing with us your time today. I know you're very, very busy people, and we do appreciate it. And you've been a help, so thank you. And with that, we will suspend and go in camera. And for the members online, I would let you know that you should have been sent by now a link for the in-camera portion. So, yes. So we will therefore suspend for 5 minutes.
you.